Do you know about Tiananmen Square? Well, you're going to learn today. We got Missionary Ben here to walk us through why it's important and how we maybe can avoid one here in America.
Bro.
Because let's get to that point. Thank you, sir, for being here, Ben.
Good to be here.
Yes, it's filling in for Pastor Toby, who's not here. He's making a government.
He's got a podcast on our Fight Left Feast Network now.
Well, you know, I didn't know because nobody told me that he was going to have a podcast here. What's your podcast called?
China Compass. China Compass.
And what's the goal of it? What are you going to be talking about?
The goal is to look at some current events every day. Every week we go do the podcast, look at some current events through the lens of somebody who's been in China for 15 or so years. To explain things that sometimes people here just don't understand what's going on and what's going on behind the scenes and different things. Wow. And then we're going to go deep once a week into a different province of China to look at, to teach people about the different places in China so they can pray more effectively for China. If I asked you, Knox, how many Chinese cities can you name off the top of your head? How long would the list be? What? Beijing?
Tokyo.
Beijing.
Yeah. Whoa.
So
it's a joke.
How are we going to pray for China? We don't have any idea what's actually there. And
that's not fair. That's not fair. I can still pray for China. I can still pray for China.
I mean, just not specifically, though.
Well, you know.
All right.
The spirit works,
guys.
bro.
You listen to Cross Politics because you want to make an impact. That impact requires time and money. Allow us to introduce you to Dominion Wealth. Love those guys. Had a conference call with them.
I see. This is one of those ads say, we need more of your money, so let's make sure you can get more money. So do Dominion Wealth so you can get a better club membership at Cross Politics.
They can't buy you. Yeah. Where am I? They can't buy you more time, but they can help you build wealth over time with holistic financial strategies, including budgeting, insurance, investments, estate planning, and more. The mission of Dominion Wealth is not to just help individuals, but to help the broader Christian community. I wish Toby was here to read ads, so I'm not very good at this.
We all do.
They educate, advise, and build plans, but more of you are listening to this ad because I'm doing such a bad job with it, to reduce your donations to Caesar so you can maximize your gift to God with strategies like family banking and capital maximization growth strategies. Bunch of big words I didn't learn in college. No matter your tax bracket, there are solutions for every fiscal stage of life at Dominion and for your children. If you and your spouse want to take Dominion over your finances, book a complimentary consultation at reformed.money. They own that. They own that. I love that. Reformed.money. From baptism to burial. That's good. Dominion has you covered. Once again, that is reformed.money to book your complimentary consultation. Check them out. I have another one. But this is actually important to our own desires and what we want you to do.
I think the other one is too.
That's an important one too. Check those guys out. God the Father is waiting and looking down the road for all his prodigal sons to return. Will Prodigal America return to the Father in repentance, confessing that Jesus Christ is Lord, or will we fall to our own destruction and become a pillar of salt as a memorial for other nations? Ouch. Join us on Reformation Weekend, October 31st through November 2nd in Fort Worth, Texas for the annual Fight Laugh Feast Prodigal American Conference. You'll spend the weekend hearing from George Grant, Dr. George Grant, Pastor Dusty Devers, and Legislator Dusty Devers, Steve Dace, Dr. James White, Pastor Doug Wilson, Pastor Toby, our live show, psalm singing, feasting for good food and beer and all that good stuff. Go to prodigalamerica.com to check that out. Early registration, second phase of early registration ends July 1st. So sign up. We'd love to see thousands of you there in Fort Worth and part of it is like make a statement. You know, the presidential election is about 2-3 days after our conference.
Yep.
And I think one of the statements we need to make is that we trust in the Lord our God. We don't trust in Biden. We don't trust in Trump. We don't trust in chariots, horses. We trust in the Lord our God. And I think that's really important for what's going to be happening in November.
And we've tried our very best to lower the price of tickets so that we can make it as affordable as
Cheapest
possible.
conference ever.
That you can show up there and so go check it out.
Yep. All right. So Missionary Ben was deported from China in 2018 after serving as a missionary for 15 years in Gansu Province. Did I say that right? Gansu. His passion is to help Christians pray more strategically for China. Prayforchina.us. Is that your website?
That's one of our websites. Yeah.
Okay. While also helping to mobilize a new generation of missionaries from both the Latin America and English-speaking world. Pray, give, PragueGiveGo.us.
Yeah, PragueGiveGo.us is kind of like a landing page where you can get links to different things we're doing, different books that I've helped to publish, and different things regarding all missions related. But PragueGiveGo.us.
Yeah, PragueGiveGo.us, and also a new our newest podcast on the Fight Laugh Feast Network, Compass. China Compass. China Compass. Oh, yeah. Not Compass China. China Compass. Compass Cinema. Compass Cinema. My buddy runs a company called Compass Cinema. So China Compass. And you can actually find it in our app, on the network. And
8 shows are dropped already, so you got to do some catching up.
7 have dropped. I think 1 today will drop sometime right after the show.
Okay. Awesome.
So we are, this is actually, I didn't know this until last week. You texted me, hey, can I come on the show next week? I'm going to be in town. This is actually the anniversary, the 3rd and 4th, June 3rd and 4th is the anniversary of Tiananmen Square Massacre. And it's, I mean,
China doesn't call it a massacre. That, by the way, they don't like that term. So
they call it.
You won't find that in Chinese search.
They call it reorganization. Reorg.
They call it quelling a peaceful protest. Quelling protests and stuff like that.
But
did they at least call it peaceful?
No, well, they say it wasn't peaceful. They say it was peaceful. They say it wasn't, and that's why they use violence to quell it.
So actually, I mean, the only thing when I think of Tiananmen Square, I think of that dude standing in front of a tank, like the very iconic. And I know that there was like a protest and some people died. 1989.
Yep, it was 35 years ago today. That's the 35th anniversary.
Wow.
So
just educate me on like what was Tiananmen Square, and am I even pronouncing it right? All about.
Yeah, not quite right, but it's okay. As good as Americans are going to do. Tiananmen is the proper pronunciation. Tiananmen literally means gate of heavenly peace. And it refers to the old city gates that surrounded Beijing, old Beijing. And the square is set right next to one of those old city gates. I think it might be the South Gate. I forget exactly which gate it is. But it's a big, huge plaza with a mausoleum in the middle. People don't even think this. The mausoleum in the middle of the plaza houses to this day Mao Zedong on ice, basically. People go by the millions to line up and see him still like not on ice really, but they've done something to where it looks like it's his real body sitting there, and people go see from a high vantage point looking down at his casket with his body still there on ice. That's in Tiananmen Square. To the north of Tiananmen Square is the Forbidden City. It's kind of a big tourist thing where it's the old buildings that you think about when you think of old China.
Okay.
And there's big government buildings nearby. So it's right in the heart of Beijing, the most important plaza there, huge plaza. And what happened is in 1989, there was a burgeoning kind of liberalism, but for China, liberalism meant going more democratic. There was a push for that. So students were gathering from all over China in Beijing and beginning just to demand more rights, to demand a more opening, a change of the political government. And it was making the leadership very uncomfortable, but they didn't know how to stop it because they had opened up China already to capitalistic endeavors, 10 years previous. So they're opening up in one way, trying to make the money, but they're, the people are also pushing then for rights and, democratic rights, freedom of press, freedom of speech, those kind of things. And that began to gain steam all throughout the 80s and up until 89. Can I
just ask, where did that come from? Where did the need or want for democracy start to develop and come from?
I think it came with the capitalistic opening. People began to realize, that it didn't match what they had been taught ideologically. So people are pushing, and people are getting, even though China was closed off to the West in many ways, they understood what America was. America in Chinese means, literally the name translates to the beautiful country. And so people, even when they'd hear about America, they would think it's a place that's more beautiful than we are. Obviously, it's the land of promise, like a land that you can fulfill your dreams. So people wanted to have that. And it was idealistic in a sense. They didn't realize what the Chinese government really was willing to do to keep that from happening. And so a lot of the students who ended up being massacred and run out and run off, really did think they were going to bring about change. And they didn't realize they were still up against this big bad dragon that really didn't want to lose power no matter what.
So capitalism comes in, makes people want to have a different kind of government because of the freedom that comes.
I think there's a connection. I can't prove it necessarily, but because China left its true communist, socialistic, where everyone shared everything. That stopped in the late 70s, early 80s. There was reform, economic reform. That's what they called it. And that was already going for 10 years when Tiananmen Square happened. And so that was pushing people to want more and more. And people really did think that China was going to open up and go the way of the Soviet Union, maybe. It didn't. The Tiananmen Square was the turning point that really made people think, whoa, we thought it was going to get better, and they've crushed that. And now people really lost hope, and China's maintained the control since since then really tightly on the political scheme.
Who was the president during Tiananmen Square?
I think now you're putting me on the spot here. I should know some of these. I think it was Jiang Zemin was the one. Well, who was the guy's name? I'm getting all mixed up.
Deng Xiaoping.
Deng Xiaoping. Yeah, Deng Xiaoping. So he was the one, ironically, that brought about the economic reforms. He's known in China to bringing the wealth of China to this day dates back to his reforms, economic reforms. But he's also the one that pulled the trigger and said, send the military in to quell these protests. Same guy.
So the protests, how did they start?
So it started organically. Students from the major Beijing universities began together. No, it's students.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it was students. And it ended up being something where the native Beijing people also encouraged and helped the students and came alongside them. And like that guy in the tank picture, most likely he was not a student. Most likely he was a local Beijing businessman or going to work. And he was standing and showing his support for the students and his and so that's from what I read. Most likely he wasn't one of the students, but he was just a Beijing guy that lived nearby that was in support of their movement. Because Beijing typically was, as the capital, was a little more open to the outside world and was not quite as staunchly old China as what parts of China would be. And that's where the protests were the biggest. Although the protests were not only in Beijing, they were in 400 cities around China at the same time. There were smaller movements going on at the same time. And they were all stamped out in some way, starting in June of 1989, when the government decided, no more, we can't let this keep growing. We're going to get to the point of no return, and they stopped it before it got to that point.
So when did the protests start?
They really started, people started to gather in camp. They literally set up a huge camp in the plaza starting in like April of that year. Okay. So it went on for a couple months and grew and grew, and people came and joined, and students are camping. And I've talked to friends, I can't say their names, and I can't even remember one of their names, but who were there at that time. They were missionaries and early missionaries in China. And there's stories of them using the opportunity with thousands of students camping. They would go at night when people were drinking or partying or hanging out in their tents, and they would run from tent to tent, throwing bundles of tracts into every tent and trying to share the gospel with the students, because there were Christians among the students, but there weren't that many. And so it was an opportunity they want democracy, but they need to know Christ. And so let's try to share the gospel with these people. Right. And I know a guy who was there when the gunshots started going off, and he had to run for cover, and he was Australian, and got deported. They deported all foreigners in the aftermath of that. And then he got back in a few weeks later and stayed in China for many, many years. Yeah. And worked with me later. I worked with him, I guess I should say, when I first went 20 years ago.
So this is interesting. So they get there. What are they doing that starts the shooting?
So what happened, again, there was no violence up to a certain point. It was just the students were going to keep demanding our rights. We're going to demand this. And they were doing speeches. They would rotate, have speeches given.
What were they appealing to for their rights?
They're appealing to the government. And
a constitution, or what do they have?
Yeah, they were, but these people were patriotic. They really were. They wanted China to be the best China it could be. They wanted China to reform and come into, I guess, leave the mistakes behind and become better. And there were people sympathetic in the actual government who were sympathetic to them. They ended up getting dropped and getting culled from the government in the aftermath. Oh, wow. There were higher people. If you read through some of the articles that I linked to on my on the show notes for today's podcast and whatnot, there are some stories of some of the higher ups and their names that they got deposed because of their support for the students. So there were government sympathizers with the students as well. So they were appealing to their government to allow them to peacefully bring about some sort of reform. The students didn't want it to be violent. They wanted it to be a peaceful reform. Let's grow up, and stop being what we were and be something different.
And so do you have any idea of they have any markings of what those reforms were? Do they have anything they were, or just let's have a conversation?
It was real basic stuff. More freedom of the press, freedom of speech. Just
really basic, really basic stuff that we take massively for granted. They were just saying, can we get freedom of the press? Can we just get free speech?
Can we not be stopped from just doing these basic things and having school newspapers where we can say what we want to say and just stuff like that? Really basic stuff. Honestly, it wasn't anything really crazy.
So they're going to this.
It's amazing to me that they drive it such a conformity, which is what you do when you're getting rid of free speech. You're driving at conformity. You can't step out of line. You can't, and I remember when we went to, me and my wife did a missionary trip to Russia back 2010 or something. A lot of the people in Russia had similar names. Sansanovich, Alexander, and they did that because when they had a kid, they didn't want their kid to stick out. So everyone kind of stuck to kind of certain, names that they all use because they didn't want anything unique because they're afraid of the government. How is China able? I mean, China's got 1 billion people now. How is China able to kind of maintain that kind of conformity?
It really is through fear. I mean, this whole event really did. They arrested. They killed many, and then they arrested many more that were left that weren't killed, and that were trying to run and hide after the protests. And that kind of event did go through the culture at large and warn people. It was a warning: don't you dare do this kind of thing again, and stay in your place. And what China, practically how they control people is the Communist Party has branches and arms all the way down to the village level. And so through that authoritarian structure, they're able to push the same message all the way down to the village and neighborhood level. And so people are afraid to do anything because they get in trouble with the communist authorities in their neighborhood who answer to the ones higher up and so on and so forth up to the top. And so that's how they practically maintain some of that control. And then nowadays with surveillance, obviously they have everyone's face and recognition and all that going on all over the country. So they're able to do it that way as well.
Do you have a number of how many students were there that there was protesting?
I mean, at one point it was hundreds of thousands that gathered.
Oh.
I mean, maybe not sleeping
in
there.
The square?
Oh,
in
yeah.
the square?
It was
Wow.
it was massive numbers, tens of thousands at minimum. Many were camping there. And the government used weird things to try to kind of quell. Well, hey, it's unsanitary. There's not enough bathrooms. There's not enough this, and they tried to kind of come at it from a somewhat peaceful thing for a diplomatic way, and it didn't work, and it just made it worse and grow. And so finally they insisted and decided we can't let this go on anymore, and they sent military in. And the first wave of military that was sent in was ambushed by some students coming into the city. And so the students, in some cases, the numbers are disputed, but they see the tanks in the picture there. They would block roads, but with buses, and then they would surround the tanks. They set the tanks on fire, burn soldiers alive, and dragged them out, killed them. So there was violence going that direction as well, and that gave it's a good lesson. That gave the government an excuse to do more.
But it was definitely escalated by the government. Yeah. I mean, like they escalated. You're bringing tanks in?
It did.
Oh my gosh.
But there's no de-escalation though.
Yeah, and so they brought tanks in, and these pictures you're seeing here are probably.
Do you de-escalate against a tyrant? I mean, like, how do you de-escalate against a tyrant?
That's the thing. They killed soldiers and they did this thing, but they weren't ready to fight an actual civil war because they didn't have weapons. I mean, they would literally go in and with their bare hands beat these guys to death. I mean, with nothing, or with what they could grab on the street with a broken pole or something. They had no weapons, and the government did, and they started using those weapons. And there's stories of just random shooting into the crowds and people getting shot in their apartments, just sitting on balconies looking out just from random gunfire going off. So it just became a chaotic situation that the government just used to say, we're going to totally shut this thing down as quick as we can.
Ben, I got to ask, so I'm listening to this and I'm thinking to myself, in America, when we had the civil rights movement and the black people were marching to try and go from one place to the other, and they're going to get arrested to get there, we had cameras that would basically, and this is just like 20, 30 years before this, right? Well, actually, yeah, 50 years before this, 30 years.
1989, yeah.
So, and that gave the people at home watching this some sort of conviction, like, no, we don't, seeing people getting bit by dogs, the fire hydrants being opened and sprayed. We didn't want that. We're like, we don't like that. It's another person made in the image of God. No. Why is it that nothing clicked inside of the rest of the people there to see folks getting tanks sicked on them and getting?
Well, they didn't see it. There's no freedom of the press.
So so that nobody knew this was happening?
No. I mean, through the grapevine, through people sharing with friends, but this is before cell phones, right? So this is before they could easily share.
It's all word of mouth.
But this is 89.
Word of mouth. Yeah, it's word, but still, the TV would have been pro-government and all of this stuff. And so the TV would have shown and would have painted it and propagandized it to where it was the students' fault and they started it, and it would have been twisted a certain way. Now, people know better. The Chinese people at the time would have known that this was a bad deal that happened, but they were kind of felt forced into silence because they were also scared because now the government was going after everybody.
So how do we get the information then? Because eventually we find out in America this is going on.
Oh yeah, no, we knew immediately. The foreigners knew because we had foreign diplomats and foreign media was there, but that's going outside, not inside.
Okay.
And so inside China, their media is controlled by their government. And to this day,
right.
you can't be in China right now and Google Tiananmen Square and find anything on Tiananmen Square within China. No, it's all blocked. It's all. And I read this morning an article, or was it last night, that even YouTube and Google in America does limit what you find, even around the world on Tiananmen Square. They've erased a lot of old pictures from the thing. Who knows why or where? I don't know, but that's what I was reading just earlier today.
Well, you let Naomi Wolf answer that question. She'll tell you real quick. China.
Yeah.
Right? Like
China.
They slowly. Yeah. That's interesting.
So I guess so this came about because economic freedom or some version of capitalism, whatever you want to call it in China, started happening. So some sort of.
Well, it was paralleling what happened in Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union. You know, you had this movement towards like almost inevitability. Communism is going to fall. It's going to fall.
Yeah.
And it was paralleling that. And the people kind of had an idea that was happening in other places. And they thought, well, China's going to go that way too. And China's government just happened to be better organized and more defiant and say, no, we're not going to let that happen here. And they were able to come in and just forcefully.
So what I'm getting at there is like this economic freedom started to happen and the students are like, hey, we want more then. You know, we want free speech now. So it's like the economic freedom kind of fed.
I think there's no way this would have happened 10 or 15 years previous when there was no money and people couldn't travel. They had no way to go. They weren't going to school. School was shut down in China for a long time during the communist era. And I say proper schooling where you could choose where you go to school and stuff. And so none of that would have happened without the reforms that were already beginning. So it was, the students were taking the reforms to their logical conclusion, what they thought was, and the government said, no, we want reform, but only to a certain point, and then we're not going to let this go any further. We're going to maintain this.
So let me ask this question.
Go ahead.
How many government employees, soldiers are there in China? What would you think?
Oh, good grief. Tens of millions, 100 million or more.
100 million government,
I mean,
soldiers,
bureaucracy, not soldiers, but government employees, everything. The bureaucracy is massive in China, just absolutely massive.
And if there's 1 billion citizens, so 10% are controlling the 90%.
Oh yeah. And I mean, okay, here's the deal. Communist Party members in China don't even number 100 million, less like 60 million, I think it is, something like that. And so there's probably more Christians in China than there are Communist Party members, actual card carrying members of the Communist Party.
Interesting.
And so the vast majority are just in that middle where they're content if they're making enough money to survive and eat their food and kind of live comfortable lives, but they're not full communist and they're also not Christian. The vast majority are in that middle kind of agnostic, atheistic, just live your life, make a lot of money deal.
So how many? I'm sorry, one more question.
Go ahead.
So how many Christians? You said there's 60 million card carrying the CCP. How many Christians do you think there are in China?
The estimates run from around that number up to 120 million. I mean, there's no way to know for sure, but yeah, they're most likely. Again, it's hard. It's really hard to say, but anywhere from 50, 60 million up to 120, 30 million Christians.
If capitalism at that time is starting to have an effect on the people in China, to the students are saying,
just because not true capitalism.
No, I
some version.
Fair enough. Some sort of
opening economic,
manipulated version of capitalism that people are getting a taste of, a whiff of. They're smelling the odor of it. Okay, and it's a beautiful odor. But if that's happening then in the 80s and it's causing this, what about now? There's no way they can have a tighter grip on the educational system than they had then. People are obviously. I mean, we're doing so much work with China back and forth than we ever have before. All the nations are. So there's a lot more wealth, I'm guessing, that's happening in China too. How are they able to keep that from happening again?
I think China's security apparatus has just grown. They learned from Tiananmen Square, and they've never let anything get even close to that point again. They've been able to quell anything that comes up earlier on in the process and keep that from gaining momentum to this particular point. There's never anything quite like that. So
as it grows, they grow as well. Yeah. They continue to grow
because they're also making money. And they can afford to then put cameras everywhere and hire more people to make sure that there's spies in all the schools and all the classrooms and places and make sure nothing gets going again. So they're able to do that too with the wealth that's gained through the capitalistic endeavors.
So that's what they've learned from Tiananmen Square. What is it why is this important to us and where we're at currently right now in our government?
I don't know how to answer it exactly, but I do see there are similarities. There are parallels with how our DOJ is going after dissidents and people they deem problem people, and how China went after the dissidents in the aftermath of Tiananmen Square. You see the January 6th people, how they've been like, it feels almost like they've taken China's playbook is how do we track these people down? How do we put them away? How do we scare other people from wanting to be pro government, pro US and pro whatever?
And show up to an event.
Yeah, show up to an event. And so they're really, it seems like they've learned something from that because it's very similar. You wouldn't feel safe nowadays going to an event at the Capitol, would you? You wouldn't feel like,
right. No, you're right.
You feel like they're going to come and track me and they're going to know everything I did or say who I met with. And that's exactly what they did in the aftermath of Tiananmen Square. They were able to track people down and find people through the grave and arrest them and put them away, or in some cases execute them if they found out they had done anything they considered to be what's the word? Treason against their government. Yeah, they were many students were executed and people in the city. And so they were able to they did more, but there are parallels with how our current DOJ is going after people they deem not on their side.
Was China more receptive to the version of economic freedom they were starting to see than the gospel? And what I'm getting at here, it seems like, you don't get out of this kind of communism without the gospel. Mm-hmm. This just festers. This kind of satanic power will keep controls as long as possible, and the only way you get out of this through the gospel. It seems to me like China hasn't wanted the gospel enough. China hasn't desired the gospel enough, that they wanted their economic freedoms and then they wanted their free speech freedoms, but they didn't want Jesus.
There was, the revival that happened in the 80s started out, and there was a revival in the intellectual circles and the schools, and there were some Christians involved in the protests. There were, I remember when Doug was on
Tucker,
yeah, he mentioned something about baptisms in Beijing and Tiananmen Square. Did you remember hearing that?
I did, yeah.
Interview? And I tried to find the source for that. I haven't asked Doug specifically about it. I saw him at church the other day. I should have asked him about it, where he got that information from. I couldn't find where that is, where there's like mass baptisms in the plaza. It doesn't sound crazy, but it doesn't mean that there was a Christian event, but there were Christians involved there because the universities had a lot of Christians in the universities in China, proportionately a lot of Christians. But the big revival in China you hear about happened mostly in the rural areas in some of the provinces that are like the central China provinces. So those revivals they happened among the poor, among the people that necessarily weren't benefiting from the economic upswing. And so it never really connected. You could say that China did at certain points, certain areas, want the gospel more than they wanted the reform and wanted the capitalism. But overall, the capitalism has won out, and people now are more content to have money and to make money and to have a home and have good food to eat than they are to have true freedom, whether that's freedom politically or freedom in Christ. They're more content to have what they want. They want money. Money is the god in China these days.
Money is,
yeah.
So how does this?
I had a taxi driver literally tell me that. I'm trying to witness to him, and he said, oh, I believe in, and he literally said, 我相信钱, and he's doing this like that, but that's me. I believe in money. And he's just big smile on his face, and he thought it was funny.
So how does this get us to Pastor Wang Yi? He's been in jail for 5 years now, 4 years, 5 years, something like that. 5 or 6 this year. And he got imprisoned for having an underground church and went shut down. Is Tiananmen Square connected to what's going on in the church now in China?
His trajectory is the ideal trajectory of somebody who had been involved in Tiananmen Square, because I'm sure he was probably somehow involved in that movement because of his background before he was a Christian. And then he eventually found Christ and began to make and look for reforms in the right direction through Christ. And so he would be the example of somebody who came through that and has found the right direction, has found Christ through it. There were a lot of people like him that were politically motivated early on and through the whole thing, and they got disillusioned when that all went down, and a lot of suicides, and a lot of people just went off the deep end, or they were actually killed or locked away for life. He's somebody that example. There is a remnant who came to Christ through that and are now, they're still promoting obviously a free China and different things, but they're also preaching the gospel and they see that Christ obviously is the only true answer for China.
Mm-hmm. Gabe, go ahead and read this ad, and then I'll ask my question.
Okay. You guys are aware that we have a new app. In fact, that's where you can get China Compass. If not, you should download it right now. Head on over to our app store, to your app store, not our app store. We should build one though. And type in Cross Politic, Fight, Laugh, Feast, or Pub TV. Once you find the app, you may need to update your app, or unfortunately for Droid users, you might need to delete your old Fight, Laugh, Feast app to onboard the new Fight, Laugh, Feast app and re-download it. Once downloaded, you'll be able to view or listen to our content on your mobile devices. FightLaughFeast.com. That's FightLaughFeast.com. We have all sorts of club content, which you can actually log in and access. And then we have all our podcasts on our network, which includes China Compass and Mark Dewey in the Bullpen, and also the new eschatology guys that are on our podcast and everything. So you can get all that in the app. We prefer you to download the app and engage our content through the app, because YouTube tries to cancel us. Vimeo just canceled us 8 months ago. And so, download our app, type in Fight, Laugh, Feast, or Pub TV, or Cross Politic. Thank you.
Do you, from where you see it at now, do you think that there's going to be a Reagan moment in China where we can see, tear down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev?
That's the prayer of many people,
yeah.
But it doesn't seem like that's coming anytime soon. Just looking practically, the current dictator, Xi Jinping, he will rule probably for life unless something happens, unless the Lord obviously takes him out or whatever. But so he already, they did away with the 10-year terms they were doing within the Communist Party. They had elections, but it was within the party apparatus. They had elections, and it was 10 years. So Deng Xiaoping gave way to a guy named Jiang Zemin. Jiang Zemin gave way to Hu Jintao. Hu Jintao gave way to Xi Jinping currently, and his 10 years was up in 2022. But they changed the rules, so he's now in for another however many years, and it's going to probably continue like a Mao Zedong type thing as long as he decides he wants to be in that position.
So you go ahead.
No, it's just it doesn't look good from the outside right now as far as any kind of real reform in that sense. But obviously things can change, and the biggest point would be, I think, if China really went through physical, economic hardship, the people would, because they've gotten so comfortable, they would potentially push back if things got bad enough on the ground for them as far as their comforts go. That's about the only thing I can see that would cause them to push back in a meaningful way against their government.
Do you look at some of our legislation that we have here and the way that a lot of people do businesses, and you look do business and you look and use like made in China or whatever, and you're like, oh my goodness, you guys are so perpetuating the kind of culture. We need this to, how do you look at what we do here in America and see what's going on in China and say, man, are we helping? Are we not helping? What's your take on that?
I mean, there's different ways to look at it. China rapes U.S. companies who go and do business there because they steal their technology.
Yeah.
They copy everything they do. And so it's a short-term gain for money, and then eventually they end up going out of business. China's goal is to put them out of business eventually, because they make all the same stuff in their own brands and everything. Right. So it's not a long-term winning strategy to do business with China. But when I see stuff made over there and all that things, I've lived there long enough to know that there's good people working in the factories doing the stuff, and if it works through and as a free society, capitalistic buying and selling, then let them do it. I don't have a problem buying Chinese stuff, but it's dumb for American companies to sell their soul to China in that sense, because they're going to lose that game.
So when you see the NBA, especially like you got black guys going over there who are just like not saying anything at all, and stuff happening in the NBA.
Again, it's short term for them to make a bunch of money, but long term, it's not going to look well. Oh, that was the guy that was in China's, in bed with China. In the history, looking back at those people. So what are the Christians doing that are there? Because they know they have a problem. They see what's going on. If you're in China, you're a Christian, and what's your play? Currently, the play is more or less survival. It's really tough. Persecution's gotten worse the last few years. People have a hard time just meeting in churches at all. Even underground churches are followed. People there's tracking devices and surveillance that makes it hard for even small groups to gather sometimes. And so right now there's a feeling of just survival. We want to meet, we want to fellowship, we want to grow in the Lord, we want to train our kids and not send them to the government school. So they're trying to figure out how to do that when it's illegal to do that in China, and educate your kids at home. It's not legal, but people do it, and you have to find ways to do it. So it's still a survival mode. They've got Christians, I wouldn't say on the run, but definitely trying to survive. So there's not a whole lot of a movement to really push any kind of true reform. But the reform will come when more and more Chinese are won to Christ. And that grows to a point where it will have to affect China in a bigger point. When there's Christians in different strata of society and affecting different ways and policies, there will be change, I believe, in the future.
How do you I'm thinking about COVID, when all the churches shut down with no real major pressure points. China's got some major pressure points with the church going underground and stuff like that. Worship is central to us. I don't really know if I have a specific question there, but like how, I don't know what I would do on the ground if I was Pastor Wang Yi, knowing I'm going to get arrested, not there to raise my child, knowing that it's persecution, knowing that God works this way, but it seems so dark there and so impossible to do church on Sundays. What battles do you pick? I mean, we talked about this with COVID. Like, okay, we'll pick, we'll pick some battles. I don't know. Would love to just kind of talk through like what calculations are you thinking,
And I can only answer from a small perspective because we lived in one area in one region and kind of understand how things work there. But in other parts of China, there was more freedom and still probably is in some provinces in the East generally. And in the West, there are less Christians in general and they're having to hide out. And there's one city we lived in for years and I never went to the local underground church once because it was too risky for them for to be seen.
I remember you saying that. Yeah. And risky for them.
Risky for them. And one lady,
because you're white and very obvious, and
they're so deep underground they just don't want to be known and have any chance of being found out in that way. And they've existed through all these years and decades of trouble and stuff. And there's other places in China where I've showed up at a church on a Sunday and there's a big building, big, huge church building, and they allow it to be there because most of the people in that particular small town are Christians and they just let them do their thing. They don't let them go out and evangelize, their neighbors or across the river or whatever, but they can be Christians in their area and feel it relatively freely. So
is that Chinese nationalism? What is that?
And
Christian Chinese nationalism.
Go ahead. China. So they do allow religious freedom. They say within certain spheres, but then they continually try to narrow those spheres and put rules and regulations even on top of that too. So
and as long as it's not a threat to,
as long as it's not a threat, they generally kind of hands off, but they see it as a threat most of the time, and so Christians run into trouble everywhere typically because it's a threat for them to share the gospel with their neighbor. That's considered a threat because you're trying to then share what you believe with somebody else. You're allowed to be something yourself, but you're not supposed to share it with other people.
If only we can get Christians to understand how dangerous the gospel is. They get it. They get it, right? We can't get Christians to understand that the gospel itself is going to have a massive effect on the government. We just think, just share the faith. It's not really, no. It has implications, and at least the Chinese government understands those implications.
Yeah. Well, in my case, they used the whole city surveillance apparatus to track me down over a period of a couple of days because we had given out a few thousand tracts and Bible portions. So they're that scared of the written word even. To use the whole city surveillance to track my vehicle down in a city of 3 or 4 million people to a back alley where it was parked, and then to send half a dozen police officers to my house to question me and take me in for questioning, interrogate me, and eventually deport me. I mean, all that was done because of the written word being spread. That's such a scare.
But they were right. They should because Christ is Lord, they really should be that afraid of what can happen if somebody believes the literature that you're writing down, because it has implications for how they do everything in their society. And it's really sad to say this, and as you're talking about this, I'm realizing Christians in America don't believe that. We don't believe that it has implications through every aspect of society, and they do. And so you got to go. You're a free radical that can destroy the whole. One guy handing out tracts is a free radical that can make the whole, shows you how fragile it really is that can happen. Yeah. So wow.
And there's others. I mean, there's many others that have had that. So even an English teacher who shares the gospel with their students and is found leading a little Bible study is kicked out and deported and can't come back.
It's powerful.
Because that's a dangerous thing. That's a national security issue, they consider.
And it is. And it is.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, rightly, it really is a national security issue for them. That's, oh my goodness, David's here. If they're Goliath, that's what they're saying.
So we've talked about, I mean, the COVID thing, it feels like there's some similarities just in at least how to think through things. But for us here in America, I mean, we're free speech, freedom of religion is still supposed to be a thing, right? Freedom of the press. But we've also encouraged people, hey, if you don't have a post to fight from in your city, by post I mean a good solid church, Christian community. Yeah. If you don't have a post to fight from, then maybe retreat to a post to fight from. And we're in a free country, relatively. In China, how are you thinking through and counseling those on the ground to, build community or orchestrate your lives in such a way where the gospel can still go out in a,
I think
what's the play?
I think the play is to retreat to the government that they can actually control, which is the home government and the family, because for generations, even the Christians have given their kids over to the government schools in China, and they've had the excuse that they've been forced to, but now they're realizing we can't just give them away that way because they're going to be turned into the enemy. And so that's a play that I'm hearing a lot in China is they're trying to teach their kids the gospel at home, take them out of the schools and train them up in the way. The Lord Brent Pinkle here in town, he's involved in some of that as well through his connections back in China. And that's, I think, that's the retreat. So you can't control the national government. You can't even really control the local government. You have the church government, but even that in some cases has been broken apart where they've had to split into small groups, almost like household groups, just small numbers. And so that's where they're at in many cases, trying to regroup and say, how do we start here and make this strong? And then from there, we can then begin to connect and build healthy churches, and that will eventually impact the society.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, they don't have a child policy there, right? Like, not anymore.
Not officially. I think you can't have unlimited number of kids, but there's still some rule somewhere, but it's not the one child thing anymore.
Okay. So there's still a limit on how many kids you can have.
I think there's still a limit in most places. I don't.
Okay. So
they've changed the laws a lot in recent years.
If I'm hearing you correctly, the way that this really kind of falls
have
is
some kids, baptize them.
You're having children and you're discipling them, and then eventually you're hoping that just kind of over time you're phasing out.
And that's hard. Even that's a battle because it's illegal to not put your kids in school. And so they're running risks of losing jobs and losing homes and getting arrested even for not putting their kids in school. So even that's a hard play to run.
So, but if you got your kids in school, you're still having to fight both whatever they're teaching them, and you're going to, but that's kind of your only play really as far as what you can do there on the ground. Wow.
But here's the thing. Most Chinese Christians, that 100 million, whatever number, the vast majority are still sending their kids to school, Chinese schools. So they're going to lose a lot of those kids.
How do you, okay. So
they're just, the vast majority are from who knows what backgrounds, religious and Christian. They're Christian, broadly Christian. But the numbers that are really running these plays that are helpful plays are relatively small.
So how do you cancel a family? All right. You have, let's say you're allowed to have 4 kids. You have 4 kids in China. And
that's really rare, but it's starting to happen a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's rare.
And then if you don't send them to public school, you're going to be going to jail.
I mean, again, not quite that way, but there's pressure to do that. The government comes and they threaten you in different ways. They make you think they're going to put you. I mean, there's different things they do. It's not just cut and dry. You're off.
Do you recommend? Yeah, put your kids in the schools. But here's how you handle family life when everybody's home.
I think that's a place some people have to do just when they just don't have a choice. But I keep hearing, I do hear in urban settings from Chinese Christian churches and families that they're finding ways to do Christian education. And it's risky and they run some risks and the leaders run risks, but they are finding ways to do it. But again, it's not large numbers of people, I don't think, but there is a movement to try to do that. So,
man, every time we talk about this, I always feel like my problems really are so small.
Yeah, that's right.
And I have so many advantages I'm not taking advantage of. Right? I have so many options, so many plays to run we got freedom of the press. We got, of
freedom
course there's some erosion there and we don't like it, but man, God has been really kind to us. How can we pray for our brothers over there? And then maybe a strategic point to help. I don't know even how to help, but at least be praying. It seems like prayer is like the best option we have at this point.
Yeah, well, definitely praying. And one of the things I like to teach and share. Can I plug this little book?
I was going to ask you about these 2 books.
So this is my own story of being deported and arrested in China. You can have that if you want now.
I do. Are you going to sign it for me?
I will if you want. Although I can't.
Unbeaten.
So I'll tell you why the title Unbeaten. It's not something like, hey, look at me, I'm unbeaten. It's literally what the police told me when I was there. I was being interrogated by the police, and the guy looked at me after hours of interrogation, And he said to me, "Hey, why aren't you cooperating with us? Why don't you tell us more that we're asking? It's not like we're going to beat you or anything." Ha ha ha. He laughs. And he mocked the fact that they weren't going to beat me as an American. And I was sitting there trying to be quiet, not answering his question. But I stood up and I looked him in the eye and said, "You kid, you're not going to beat me. I know you're not going to beat me, but you beat your own people. If it was a Christian here, you'd beat them, or you kill Christians." And so I called him out on that mocking thing. And so, yeah, I'm unbeaten. That's the point of that title. I'm unbeaten, but the Chinese church is not unbeaten. They've been beaten down, but they are unbeaten. In one sense, they are, because they're staying faithful even in the midst of the persecution they're facing there as well. So this just tells my story, in the book of all that went on, my arrest, deportation, from China a few years ago. You can get that at unbeaten.vip is the website for that.
Unbeaten.vip.
Unbeaten.vip.
Okay.
And, but I wanted to mention that reason I put an appendix in there. It's a message that I preach often about prayer for the persecuted church, and it's based on Hebrews 13:3. And so what I try to encourage Christians to do is put yourself in the shoes of the people you're praying for. Like, really do it. We read Hebrews 13:3 and we kind of pass it. We don't actually stop and do it.
Can't do it. I'm about to cry. Nope.
Because Knox, if you put yourself in the prison cell with Wang Yi, but think about it. You sit there with him for a while.
Yeah.
And you think about, how would you want others to pray for you and your family that's not in prison, and your son who's growing up without your dad? How would you pray for them if you were literally sitting next to them?
Hebrews 13:3 says, "Remember those who are in prison as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you are also in the body."
So I go through that in that message. But again, the point is, you pray for the persecuted church, but you put yourself in their shoes. You pray for the pastors, but any person, any mother, any grandmother can pray for the mothers and grandmothers who have lost children, who have their son in prison or whatever. You can put yourself in any of their shoes and begin to pray from their perspective. Try to put yourself in their shoes.
Bro, that's heavy.
And pray in that way.
Thank you for that.
That's my best encouragement for that particular thing. One thing specifically, if I can, we're talking about Beijing today. I know a family living in Beijing right now. I can't tell you what country they're from. They're from an English-speaking country. I can't tell their names, can't tell you anything about them just for safety, but they're there. They've been there for more than 10 years, all through COVID. They've suffered. They suffer greatly. Just isolation, no good church nearby. They can't leave, even if they wanted to, because they're fostering a little Chinese boy, and the adoptions have been shut down. So if they leave, they leave him behind. So they're not leaving. So they support themselves, teaching English, different things. Anyway, just pray for that family. And I can't say their names, but they're there. Fairly large family, number of kids, and they've been serving for many, many years there in the outskirts of Beijing.
Wow.
So pray for them.
Yeah.
What's this other book you have?
This is a book that I helped at Borden of Yale, the story of William Borden. The reason so this book, I edited the book and wrote the introduction for it. Borden was on his way to serve as a missionary in China. This is actually a good segue into one other thing I wanted to mention. He never made it to China. He died in 1913 on his way to China. But God called me 90 years later to the same city in China, same city that he was heading to work to. I didn't know his story at the time, found out later of his story, and then found out in February that I'm related to him. We're distant cousins.
Shut up.
My dad ran into this through genealogy stuff. It's legit. I said, "Are you sure?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm sure." And he showed me the stuff. And so it's a pretty cool thing. So I'm connected to him in the multiple ways, both in place of ministry and also literally related to him. We share the same, like, great grandfather somewhere down the line. But, my point being is, besides praying for China, it's possible to go. Like, anyone in this room, I'm guaranteed, could go to China next week. I can't go. I'm banned for at least 6 years now. Any of y'all could go, and you could go, and you could probably find Christians just by, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but you could encourage Christians yourself, talk to them. You could share the gospel with random people you meet. You could pray, whatever. So anybody can go almost to China. They're trying to make it easier. They're trying to get tourists back in there. So there's no reason most people can't go at least once.
Because they shut down for a number of years, 2021.
They're open. They've been open for over a year, and they're encouraging tourists to go. European countries a bunch of them now are no visa. They can just fly to China without a visa anytime. A lot of the European countries, not America, unfortunately, but, so yeah, I'd say pray, but also pray about potentially going in a strategic way to go and help and serve in different ways. There's ways to go and do that. And if people want to know more about that, you can follow our podcast. Look at the show notes. I've got my contact information in the show notes of the podcast, China Compass. And I can give you some advice on how to go about doing that if you want to do something like that with China.
Well, Christians, y'all know what to do.
Yeah.
Go before the Lord in prayer for our brothers and sisters. Thank you. That was heavy, bro.
Yeah, man.
That was heavy. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any crazy questions you wanted to say for an overtime or something?
Maybe. Unless you got some answers you just want to give for overtime. Hold on, let's find out. If you're single, get married. If you're married, have some kids. You have kids, go baptize them. Until next week, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politic.